Thank you. Yeah, we've actually played here before, like 4 years ago.
In 2006.
Yeah, 2006. Same place, though,
yes.
right? Yeah,
and
I remember
transformed it into Devil's Playground.
Right. Yeah, because I remember it reminded me of like an old Coliseum.
Yeah. So, what should we expect this evening?
Well, I remember the audience was great the last time. You know, I think there's a good, strong rock and roll audience. Yeah.
How did you actually met Billy?
Wow. See if I can remember. I was in a band living. I'm from New York, so Billy had done 3 records with Generation X and just moved to New York from London. And my band started to become managed by Bill Aucoin, who was manager of Kiss. So my band recorded a record. It was never released, and I kind of left the band, and I was looking for some other singers and stuff. And Bill Aucoin called me one day and said, have you ever heard of Billy Idol from Generation X? And I think I knew Ready, Steady, Go and kind of knew Dancing With Myself. So we arranged to meet, and I said, even if you don't want me as your guitar player, I know every musician in New York, so you're going to need a bass player and a drummer and all this. I'll help you find these other guys first. And so by the time we found the other guys, I don't know if he auditioned other guitar players, so it just seemed like a logical fit. So.
And regarding the composition, was there chemistry between you and Billy from the beginning?
Yes and no. I mean, obviously, you know, he was coming from a punk rock band, and I was coming from, you know, more of a hard rock place. All my guitar heroes were Jeff Beck and Jimi Hendrix, Jimmy Page, and punk rock was not about this kind of playing. You know, it was very simple. But one of the key ingredients was his producer Keith Forsey, who had produced the third Generation X record. Kind of realized that, well, if Billy just wanted a punk rock guitar player, he's already done that. He's come to America for a reason, to find other influences and find musicians that are capable of maybe challenging him and also adding ingredients to make something new. So I think once we figured out where our influences crossed, and oddly enough that turned out to be Lou Reed, because I was in a band that played a lot of Lou Reed music. So one day we're, you know, just jamming, and he goes, do you know Coney Island Baby by Lou Reed? And I knew it note for note and solos. And I said, yeah, I know all of that. You know, I know that whole Rock and Roll Animal, the live record, because the 2 guitar players on that record were my favorite guitar team. So once he realized that I liked all this kind of David Bowie, Lou Reed, the kind of glam T-Rex side of things, that seemed to be, great, you know, now we're on common ground.
And what was the first song you wrote together?
Wow, good question. It was probably something that never became anything, but I remember when we wrote, there's a song on the first album called Hole in the Wall, and I remember when we got that was kind of the beginning of my using guitar effects and creating this kind of sonic palette that we kind of utilized a lot later on. So Hole in the Wall might have been the first thing, really. Yeah.
So we all know how Billy is on stage, but how is he in the studio?
Well, he's such a fan of the history of music and rock and roll that whenever we come up with something in the studio, we usually think of a reference, like, you know, and it sometimes could be some Elvis thing or a Doors thing or some classic rock thing. And I think we've over the years, you know, we've worked together over 32 years now, so we have a way of communicating that's almost beyond words, or I'll just play something. I'll kind of know by how he's phrasing something what might work, so we almost don't have to say much.
I've read on the internet, is your real name Stephen Bruce Schneider?
Yeah.
Your parents are German?
Well, no, they're not. During the Second World War, when my grandparents came, they immigrated, and when they land in New York at Ellis Island, my grandfather was Russian, and he was just so happy to come off the ship and arrive in a new country that the name that he gave them they couldn't even pronounce. So Schneider is a tailor in German, as if you go get your pants fixed or something. So it's like saying Smith or Jones or some common name. He didn't speak much English, and they just gave him whatever name. He was just happy to be there. So I don't even really know what the real family name is.
I understand. So what made you change to Stevens?
I was in the band I was in before Billy. We were trying to come up with a name, like rock and roll names. And we were friends with the guys from the New York Dolls, and Sylvain came over our loft. So we're talking, and he says, well, why don't you do what I do? Just use your first name twice. So I really was named by one of the New York Dolls, which is kind of cool.
Was your family involved in the process of becoming an artist?
They were supportive, but your parents don't really know rock and roll, so I went to school, music school. I went to the school that there was a TV series and a movie based on called Fame. So I was admitted into the school, and it was all musicians and actors, but the guitar is not what's called a symphonic instrument. When you go see an orchestra, there's no guitar. So they asked me to play another instrument, like viola, violin or something, and I lost interest very quickly. And so my school happened to be in Manhattan at just around the time when all the kind of bands were happening at CBGB's and another club called the Mercer Arts Center. So you had Blondie and Talking Heads and Television, and I managed to go there, sneak in one night and see some bands. I saw Johnny Thunders with the Heartbreakers, and I thought, well, that's my education more than what I'm learning in school, learning about Vivaldi and Beethoven, and this is not really my thing.
How hard was for you at the beginning of your career to break the ice and get a contract?
Well, fortunately, with Billy, he already had a recording contract with Chrysalis that they had signed him to a solo deal. But the band I was with before him, we were signed to Island Records, and our record was never released. But as luck would have it, when we recorded, Robert Palmer lived by the studio and kind of mentored me, became my friend. He was the first rock star I ever met, and consequently we became friends. I worked with him many years later. So there was a lot of, heartbreak, and the record's not released, and there's many times of not having much money for food and things like that. But I don't think any musician looks on those days as being difficult, because you're doing what you love to do, and as long as you're willing, as long as you're happy. I was in a band, and we were playing and all living together, and I look back on it as being a great time. So it's always difficult, and it is, being a musician is not always easy, but it's a lot easier than the guy who's doing construction or manual labor.
You were involved in so many different music projects. How much is instinct and inspiration, and how much is hard work when you approach?
Probably equal amounts. The hard work comes from the hours of perfecting something, because when you initially come up with a song or an idea, it has potential, and it's like a child, you know. You have to teach it a language and teach it to walk, and songs are almost the same. They have to take a form, and great songs should have meaning, and they should, I always feel that even though a song could be 4 minutes long, it should be like watching a movie where you have hills and valleys, and sometimes there's a love scene, and sometimes there's an action scene, and a great song should have all of those things, and drama, and you should feel that that song was written just for you, you know. So that takes time to perfect, and you're not always successful. Not every song's a winner.
For the cover of Atomic Playboy's album, you worked with an artist who designed monster from...
Yes, Alien, yeah.
You like horror movies? Or
yeah, well, he just passed away 3 weeks ago, Giger. But he, way before he did Alien, he did the album cover in 1973 for Emerson, Lake and Palmer called Brain Salad Surgery, and I loved this album. And he didn't do very many record covers. He did one for Debbie Harry and one other band, maybe Sepultura. So when I signed my recording contract with Warner Brothers, it was in the contract that we would pay to have him do the cover, because he was very difficult to get. He wanted to hear the music first. He wanted to make sure that it was, you know, the right thing, and I was really honored to work with him. Yeah, and I'm a fan of Alien movie, and yes, I do like horror movies.
Those black and white horror movies, do you like?
Yeah, like Frankenstein or Dracula. I love them. Yeah.
What made you approach flamenco?
The first real guitar teacher I had was a flamenco guitarist. He was actually Romanian, and he was gypsy, and he up until then I had guitar teachers that were trying to teach me really boring stuff, like nothing I wanted. So I went to summer camp for music, and he was so passionate about music and explaining how he had escaped the Nazis in the Second World War, and that he and his brother, all they had was the 2 guitars that they came to America with. And when he sat down and played, it was so emotional, and I didn't know what flamenco was, and I said, what style of music is this? Because this is not classical, and it's nothing I had heard before. And he explained to me what flamenco was, and I fell in love with it then, and I always followed flamenco, and then became aware of Paco de Lucia, who's the greatest flamenco player, and Carlos Montoya, and flamenco is like heavy metal of guitar, of acoustic guitar. So I just fell in love with the passion of it.
How do you choose the name for an instrumental song?
Sometimes from a movie, you know, I'll see a movie idea or something, or some of the titles on Flamenco Go-Go, like Cinecita was a homage to Federico Fellini, the film director, and he had just passed away. And a lot of times, what's interesting about writing instrumental music is I would have movies on all the time in the studio with no sound, and I would put on Fellini movies or old Orson Welles or some visual kind of cue, and then write music to the picture. So the Fellini movies were, there was like 4 or 5, and that music was written by being inspired by the picture.
How did your collaboration with Harold Faltermeyer begin for the Top Gun anthem?
The producer for Billy Idol is Keith Forsey, and Keith and Harold started together working with Giorgio Moroder. They did all of the Donna Summers and disco records in Germany. So when we did Billy's third record, Whiplash Smile, Harold came in to play keyboards on it, and I didn't know that he was doing film scores and all of this, and so one day he asked me to stay at the studio after the Billy Idol session, and showed me a video cassette of Top Gun, early, and he said, I'm working on this movie, would you like to do music? And I think maybe Tom Cruise, I only knew from Risky Business or something, so I agreed to work on it, and we did it actually after the Billy Idol session.
Today's music rock takes different shapes. Do you think the metal rock and generally the hard rock scene still has the authentic message?
Yeah, I do. I mean, there's good music. Look, there's always going to be good music and maybe not bad music, but music that I don't like. But what is really good for me as a guitar player, because in 1990 when grunge happened, it was no longer considered cool to be good on your instrument. It was like if you could play like too fast or this and that, it was no good, because Kurt Cobain said play 3 chords, which was great for Kurt Cobain, but not great for people that were more proficient. So I think in modern music there's a lot of really good guitar players that are expressing themselves and challenging themselves. So I think it's I like a lot of modern rock stuff. Some of it, when the vocals are like Cookie Monster, we call them. I don't relate to that, because for me, I like to hear a melody. But there's a lot of, I think, good players and good bands happening, and it seems more healthy in Europe than the United States. The United States is very much about singles and radio and dance music. In Europe, it's more, because the United States doesn't even have like big rock festivals anymore. So Europe, I think, is much healthier for rock and roll.
You do guitar clinics?
I've done some, yeah.
And what do you think about the young guitarists?
Some are incredible. Some, I went in the States. We have Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp, where a lot of famous people get together and give, kind of like, they train the bands to play and stuff. And the most recent one I did, there was a 10-year-old boy who could play every Van Halen and Yngwie Malmsteen and all this. It was unbelievable. But at the same time, it's important to have emotion. You can't just have the technique. So I think it's a mixture of of technique and emotion and loving songs. I'm very fortunate. I work with good singers. So I don't always. It's not always about all this kind of stuff, because the singers don't give a shit about this. They just want a good song, which is good for me.
A message for our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, hope people are as excited as we are. We have a new record coming out in October, and Billy has his autobiography, which he's written himself, which is I think expose people to a side of him that maybe people aren't aware of incredibly inventive and intelligent, really great person. And I'm just happy that people still come to our concerts and seem to still really enjoy what we do. So
thank you very much.
All right, great. Yeah, my pleasure.